Hi guys, Tracie Daly here. Pat and Courtney's podcast, Evil Pudding. Go and check it out. They're currently doing a giveaway for my book, Tracie's Story, until the 6th of June, and they have covered Tracie's story. You can listen for free on their website, which is pretty much anywhere online. Evil Pudding Podcast, and you'll find it straight away. Okay, chapter 19, which begins, ironically, where Evil Pudding Podcast ends just as I've got into my first foster placement. Chapter 19. The first few days were really strange. My name is Brenda, but you can call me Brenda or Mum, as I'm your foster mum, but only if you want to. Big Jim is Big Jim or Dad, okay? She had a sing-song voice, which I didn't like and wasn't used to. It sounded posh. I blanked her whilst Caroline nodded and smiled. There's no way in hell I'd go lay one mum apart from Pat and my mum. Big Jim wasn't so big. He was around my height, and I was to turn 10 in a couple of months, making it around July time. He was, however, rather rounded. Not fat, but round, with grey wiry hair that popped out everywhere apart from the middle. He was the quiet one. Brenda was obviously the boss of the house, and he just rolled over with whatever she said, which was totally alien to me, and made me twice as concerned about her as I had been before. I'd seen what Pat could do to someone she didn't like. Later, when I became accustomed to the routine, I'd get up and get dressed straight away for breakfast at the breakfast bar. And when I say bar, I mean a half kitchen-length entire bar complete with wooden bar stools and a variety of cereals in all plastic containers. We could have cereal on one toast or 2 pieces of toast. If I wanted more, I could top up as much fruit as I wanted. Then it was upstairs for a wash and teeth cleaned, grab my bag and sit downstairs in the living room until it was school time. Usually we would be watching Saved by the Bell or The Big Breakfast. After school it was straight home, upstairs for homework and change, and then down for a full meal with dessert. Elbows off tables and back straight with knife and fork in the proper hands. No sandwiches. Bread was a side piece I could cut up on my plate, but not make a sandwich out of my food. Then homework would be scrutinised and adjusted accordingly, and if everything had been spot on that day, I'd be allowed a few hours free before a shower and bed at 7 p.m. Totally different to my world. My world was a little erratic. Swearing was also a huge no-no. I'd grown up with it to the part that it was part of my natural language. I knew a fucker from a bastard a mile away. If he could be a fucker, he was usually an okay guy, but if he was a bastard, he was plain evil. I remember walking into my room for the first time, up the well-kept clean staircase, and turned left past pictures of all the other children Brenda had looked after. "They'll come back, you know. They always do," she'd tell me. I turned left and was met with a poster of Robbie Fowler on the door, with Liverpool in bold letters straight across the top. I was hopeless at football. I'd never played at school, and the lads on Morrow Road who played were always cutting people's clotheslines down and stealing from gardens, so I rarely played with them. This wasn't going to go well. A ginger-haired lad a few years older than me appeared out of nowhere. I'd never seen hair so bright. His face was full of freckles. "Who do you support?" I guess he was being friendly, but at the time it felt like intrusion. How dare he presume I support anyone, or that I even wanted to talk? Liverpool," I replied, not having a clue about football. "Who's your best player?" he asked. I pointed to the poster. "Him," I said, and walked into the room. I'd been told it was mine. He walked in behind me. I expected trouble. Wasn't this my room? The room had 2 bunk beds, and little Jim, who was twice my width, at least a foot taller, jumped up onto the bunk on the right and leaned on his elbow watching me. "Our room?" "My room," he said, lifting his oversized head up slightly to get a better view of the new guy. "Yours," he said, pointing to the other bunk bed. Great. Just great. I thought, staring at the small shiny gloss on the wood of the wardrobe, with no idea what I should be doing or where to look. I wondered where Wenzel and Mom were. I turned to my left as I sat on the bottom bunk. Huge garden, conservatory the size of my old living room, a long drive and a farm beyond the garden. They probably own that as well, I mused. Would be beautiful if they didn't actually live in it. I laughed at my own thought unintentionally. "What's funny?" little Jim said. "Nothing. Where's the toilet?" I asked. He pointed behind him in reply. Share the joke, he demanded rather than asked. I need a piss, I replied. For the first time I heard my name screech like a foghorn on speed. Tracie! That sing-song voice shouted in a long drawl and drawn up the stairs. I didn't pee and went to go down the stairs, where I was met at the top by Brenda, who had obviously been listening in. Okay, you're new, so I'll let you off this once, okay? She was baby-talking me, but there was a threat behind her voice. The question was rhetorical, but I didn't get it. Okay? I asked. We don't swear in this house, ever. And could you take your shoes off? I'll buy you some slippers for around the house. What did I do? I asked her innocently. What did you just say? She asked me, and I believe she genuinely didn't hear me. I asked what it was I did wrong. I asked again. You swore, she said. Can I go now? I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, and try to remember what I said, she remarked. I looked down at my feet. Shoes off? What sort of game was this? I didn't swear, did I? I replayed the conversation in my head 20 times. I was good at that. I'd had to do it a lot. Then I left her that she thinks piss is a swear word, silly cow. I left my shoes on, but not out of malice, simply because she'd asked me could I take them off. And well, I could, but it wouldn't help me much if I needed to leg it when someone starts swinging. So no. Unless I'm told to, then they stay on. It's worth noting that during all this, I've not seen a hint of violence in anyone. No anger. Zero. Which creeped me out more than if they'd said, if you don't take your shoes off, I'll slap you. That stuff I was used to. I could handle that. I understood that. Not knowing the people, the ways, or the punishment, that really concerned me. Caroline's room was next to Brenda's bedroom and shared with Brenda's daughter, Rita, who was gorgeous, at least 18 years old with long strawberry blonde hair. Girls never went in boys' rooms and vice versa. Nobody ever went in Brenda's room, not even her own children. What was she hiding? Why can't people come and see in your room? I asked her. Well, you won't want me snooping in your stuff, so I don't let people snoop in mine, she replied. Snoop? I asked, never having heard the word. Look through, she replied. Oh, okay, I said. Yep, definitely hiding something, I thought. The first time Brenda told Caroline it was bedtime, I was gobsmacked. She was to go to bed at 6:45 p.m, and I at 7 p.m. As we got older, it would get later, she told us. We were not used to bedtimes. If Wenzel said bed at 4 p.m, we went to bed. If it was halfway through the night and he said bed, we went to bed. The time was irrelevant. It was the order that held importance. I remember asking him once, can I go to bed? He asked, you tired? I was cross-legged on the floor with my back to the TV. Yeah, I replied. Stand up then, he said. I got up to go to bed and he bellowed, no! I stood stock still, mid-stride. Suddenly I was wide awake. He stared at me, so I stood up straighter. That's better. Won't fall asleep now. Will you? He said. Stay there, he added. I was too tired to care. I accidentally broke another rule by looking straight at him. He smiled at me. Caroline, are you tired? He asked her. No, sir, she replied quickly. Okay, Jonathan, he said. Yes, sir, Jonathan said. Go to bed then, Wenzel told him. I said nothing, made no movement, no sign that I could see what he was doing. Good night, Jonathan said, kissing Mum and Wenzel before bed. Caroline went up about an hour later. What? He asked me, although I'd said nothing. Nothing, sir, I replied, not taking my eyes off his. I wasn't tired anymore, I was angry, fully prepared for the beating. At least I could go to bed afterwards. 10 minutes or so went by. If you keep staring at me, I'm going to knock your head off, he said, turning from the TV to face me. I held his gaze for a split second, and then lowered my head. Better, he said. And now here I was, in someone else's house, being told I was to go to bed at 7 p.m. She's not my mum. I usually watch Prisoner Cell Block H, I queried. Bedtime is at 7 p.m. here, she repeated. I lay in bed for around 20 minutes after my shower that night, before I was up on the landing talking to Caroline in her room. This is bullshit, I said. I know, she replied. It's not for long, she said, trying to comfort me. Still bullshit, I told her. Little Jim came up the stairs. I didn't move. I'd already tuned into his walk earlier in the day. He was heavy and shuffled on one side, ever so slightly. He was slow to reach the top, And I figured he's one of us, like in Mac. You had the kids and you had the adults. That's how it was. He won't care. You should be in bed, he said, looking down at me as he reached the top of the stairs. I was a little shocked. I eyeballed him, disgusted. You should be in bed, he said again. I heard you, I replied, with the same even tone he gave me. Then he turned and did what no lad I knew of in Mac would ever have done. Mom! He shouted down the stairs. She came up and I looked at her. Bedtime, she said. I'm not tired, I'm talking to Caroline, I told her, turning around to point to Caroline, who'd vanished into her room. Smart girl. Talk in the morning, Brenda told me. Bullshit, I muttered, walking as slow as I could manage past Brenda and Sidekick. Little Jim had to go to bed himself, so the slower I moved, the longer he had to wait. I could feel his eyes boring into my head. He jumped to the top bunk and lay with his back to me. I etched bullshit into the top bunk with my thumbnail, making a mental note to get something harder to do it with tomorrow. A few hours later, the bedroom door opened, and a tall lad with black curly hair walked in. He was thin, but with big long arms. All right, lad, he asked jovially. His arms kind of jiggled as he spoke. I nodded, and he stripped and jumped into the bottom bunk on his side of the room. I liked him straight away. And that's the end of chapter 19. I just want to shout out again Evil Pudding, because I've just reread that and I remember very vividly Courtney was reading out half of the exact same chapter, and it's surreal reading the memories that I have, the words that I wrote after somebody else has just read them out and done such a great job. It's really surreal rereading. But again, big thanks to these guys. Big thanks. Chapter 20. There was a picture of a fighter plane in the living room above the sofa. Big Jim was ex-parachute regiment. He'd done a number of marathons in his younger days. He wobbled when he walked, grey in places like Jim was ginger. Take little Jim's muscle and turn it to fat, and change the ginger to grey and balding, and they were otherwise identical. When I'd found out he was ex-military, I was impressed, and hoped for someone like my Uncle Carl. I was disappointed. When he asked if I liked golf, I was more disappointed. I hated golf. I remembered him hitting a training ball from one end of his garden to the other for hours on end, trying to perfect his swing. I was bored silly. I rarely spent time with Big Jim, but he was, to be fair, an okay guy. I liked my own company. I enjoyed being silent. It gave me power, something people couldn't take away from me. My choice to speak. Caroline had developed a stutter, and although we played together, we rarely spoke. I was like that with everyone. Caroline had become pals with Brenda, which was another reason for me not to talk to Caroline. I guess we were already brought up to distrust one another, and I was just looking for reasons to distrust her more. Her relationship with Brenda increased that distrust. Mum and Wenzel turned up for a visit. Mum remained silent on the sofa. She didn't play with us or talk to us as much as I can recall. I want to be really specific here, because I remember writing this. I want to be really specific, and I'd even go as far as challenging Brenda or anybody that was there at the time to say differently. And I mean no disrespect to my mother when I say this. Mum remained silent on the sofa, and she didn't play with us at all. And she may have said 4 words the entire time she was there, if that. Back to the book. Brenda did the airs and graces bit with little china cups, saucers, a tiny plate with biscuits on, and then added, "Tell your parents what a great time you've had." Caroline jumped on that immediately. I remained quiet long enough for Wenzel and Mum to pick up a problem, to the point that Brenda said, "Tell them what you've been doing then." "Yeah, wonderful," I replied. I don't remember them leaving, but Mum had sat totally motionless the entire time. She was in her own world, and whatever she was seeing, it wasn't pretty. I wasn't offended or upset. I knew Mum was dealing with things the best way she knew how. Our inner worlds can be really helpful when it comes to seeing harsh shit, and she was rolling with it to survive. It was about a week later. I had been given new clothes. My old ones had been taken away. I was pissed off. I wanted my old clothes back. I didn't belong to Brenda and Jim.